Valve have recently updated their algorithm to help indie games get spotted. However, one indie dev claims that Steam is killing indie gaming with this update. Here to discuss it with me, Mr. Henry Cooper.
The situation sure sounds dire.
Yeah, there's a lot to get through with this one. Let's have a look at the situation as it is. Now, the problem for indie developers on Steam these days is that so many games get released to Steam every day now that it's just hard to stand out from the crowd, and they've got to compete with the AAA games and all the other indie games. 9,000 games last year got released to Steam, which is an average of 25 every single day. That's 173 per week. If you've got 172 competitors every single week trying to vie for your money, vie for sales of your game, it's not an easy place to stand out from the crowd, and it's harder and harder every single year. These numbers are just last year, and these are increasing year on year for indie developers. And the problem for indie devs is that they rely on the revenue that they get from Steam's algorithm, and the amount of exposure that they get on the algorithm directly affects the amount of revenue that they make. So more people that find your game through the algorithm, more people buy it, more money that you make. It's that simple. So Steam can really have a huge effect on the amount of money you make just by favoring you in the algorithm.
And for most people, it seems totally random how the algorithm works. It's not like you can try and cheese it and get it to work in your favor. Sometimes you can on stuff like YouTube while having clickbait, but it doesn't really work the same way on services like Steam.
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's very competitive, as we said. Many indie devs feel that less weight should be put on the popular games in the algorithm and help out the indies a little bit more, try and send some traffic towards them. So Valve released an update on the 12th of September, which is Thursday last week, and it's called the Discovery Update, which, as the name suggests, is aiming at addressing the complaint from indies that they need more discovery. The point of the update, according to Steam, is previously when customers would look for games by browsing the recommendation feed at the bottom of the homepage or the more like this sections, they weren't seeing as many different games as we would have liked. Furthermore, we are receiving lots of feedback that recommended for you felt too biased towards only the most popular games and didn't feel very personalized. So a bit more detail from the blog post on the 12th of September. The point of changing the algorithm was to diversify the games being fed by the algorithm and try to still keep the recommendations relevant to the unique user, and obviously make the algorithm less biased towards popular games, help out indie games and get them more exposure. So apparently they experimented the updated algorithm on 5% of users, and they found that the experimental group clicked on the recommended games 15% more, which is an increase.
Yes.
Good figures there. They saw a 75% increase in the number of unique games visited, so more discovery there, and 48% increase on the average visits per game. So if you're an independent developer and they're making this change and you're being told you'll get 48% more visits to your page, sounds good, right?
Yeah, because a certain percentage of them will then go on to buy the actual game, so it just feeds the beast.
And they also saw an increase in purchase and wish listing across a broader set of games. Valve were happy with the algorithm and decided to roll it out to everybody, and that's what they announced on Thursday the 12th. However, not everything has gone to plan. Since then, indie devs have been complaining on Twitter, posting graphs and all sorts of stuff, saying that it's not helping them out whatsoever. In fact, it's been really bad for them since the changes come into effect. So, Henry, tell us what these indie devs are saying.
So, a chap called Jan Ciesla, might be Jan, I'm not sure, from Failcore Games said on Twitter, "Thanks to the changes, more people are deleting their wish lists than adding them. And it's Steam who tells us to set up a page as soon as possible and prioritize wish lists if we want to succeed." Now, in case you don't know, wish lists are super, super important, because you see a game you like the look of, maybe it's not out yet, you'll say, okay, wish list it, I'm not ready to buy it yet. And that means that you can see all the notifications of any updates that come to the game, or when it eventually does go on sale, or anything like that. It helps prevent games getting lost in the sea of games. Now, apparently the platform now has over 30,000 games on it, and that was as of January earlier this year. And more than half the games on the platform came from 2017, despite the platform going live back in 2003. So it's building, and it's building fast.
But more than half the games on Steam came in the last two and a bit years. Yeah, so
that's 15,000 games there.
That's a lot of games.
A developer behind the game Unbound Worlds Apart said, "Thank you at Steam Games for killing indie gaming."
Strong words.
So he's not mincing there. And he goes on, wishlist graphed after their big update where they support indie games. And he shows this graph where you can clearly see that around the 11th and 12th of September, when they started rolling out the update, things start to spiral down.
Yeah, exactly the opposite of what they predicted with their testing, which is concerning, right? If you're an indie dev and you want, obviously, the point of this update is to get you more discovery. What you're finding here is obviously less people are seeing your game, less people are wishlisting it. And like you said, Henry, they rely on wishlists for revenue. A certain amount of people, like a certain percentage of people who have it on wish lists will buy it eventually. So it's a huge way of maintaining revenue over the long term, is having people wish list your game. And if the wish lists are going down, your revenue's going down, and it's crippling these companies.
And it's a kind of like a positive feedback loop, because the more people wishlist it, which means that there's more impressions of the game, which means it'll get fed into the algorithm more, which means more wish lists and then more purchases. It goes on and on. So if they're messing up the wish lists, the first step of the ladder is broken. And then this guy goes on, for example, a game like Hollow Knight, in the more like this section from the game page, they only put popular games and no smaller games. Moreover, games that will be launched in the near future are currently inexistent there, and this section brings the biggest organic traffic. So that's saying the big indie games, which were really successful games like Hollow Knight or a game like Celeste, that kind of level, they're having no problem. They're being fed just as well as they would be by the algorithm. They're thriving. But anything else, they're really struggling, and they're not seeing any of the benefits, and in fact, they're feeling a downside to this, worse than it was before.
Yeah, and you would expect indie games to be served on the more like this section of Celeste and Hollow Knight. Because they're indie games themselves, they should be recommending more indie games on them pages, but in fact they're not, and that's this point here, right?
Another guy, Mark Viola, who is a developer behind the JRPG Bright Red Skies, he put up an even more striking graph with the caption, "I noticed a huge drop as well." And again, that's exactly around the 11th of September, when just before the update went live, and it's a huge spike down.
Looks like he's down to about a third of what he was in the previous days, which is horrific, really.
Yeah. Then there was a bit more with Thomas Altenborough, who is a developer for Flying Oak Games in France, and he even brings out plenty of different statistics telling you different things about what's happening. The new Steam algorithm is not better, it's a catastrophe. We're getting reports from many devs that their daily wishlisting dropped considerably. Scourgebringer, which is a game that he's currently worked on, took a minus 66%, an all-time low. Months of effort ruined in an instant. Our game literally disappeared from most sources of recommendations. It's a terrible loss for us. From what I observed, the new algo totally discards games that are not released and below 40k wishlists from recommendations. It's even more focused on big hitters than before. So again, that's the unreleased games, and the low wishlisters are getting hit the hardest, and they're the ones who really need it the most.
Yeah, and the implication here is that games that are unreleased are getting ignored, right? So if unreleased games are getting ignored, that's his gripe here. His game is unreleased, and that's the same as all these other examples that we're thrown in, Unbound Worlds Apart, and what was the Failcore Games dev as well. They're talking about their games that are wishlists on games that are not released yet. And actually, PC Gamer is reporting that some developers haven't noticed a difference at all, while others have actually seen a boost. And these are obviously the games that have been released. So my question is, right, these games that aren't released yet are seeing a downturn, but why shouldn't Steam prioritize games that are available right now over games that aren't available yet?
Yeah, what does Steam gain by promoting the ones that aren't out? Because obviously they are a business, they need to make money, and they'll make money of the ones that are released so they can get the percentage of the sale.
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, obviously it's catastrophic according to David Altenberger for him, and it's killing indie gaming according to the Unbound Worlds Apart dev. But it's not as crystal clear as it seems, because if you ask me, you should be prioritized games that aren't unreleased yet. So it's still inconclusive whether they're, like David Altenberger says, that it's even more focused on big hitters than before. That's not necessarily the case if PC Gamer are to be believed.
Yeah, and the question I have is, should the bigger indies, the ones who are actually thriving, should they have a responsibility to stick up for the little guys? Because at one point in their lifespans, they would have been the little guys, the unreleased games who weren't getting any attention. Should they be coming out and saying things like the developers behind Hollow Knight, for example? Yeah,
I mean, it's tricky because you'd think that indies have to stick together.
Yeah.
Because it's, especially on Steam, it's such a saturated market though. It's getting so much more difficult, especially when you're just reliant on these these algorithms all the time. And it's not just the same on Steam, it's the same on any digital marketplace. You think the likes of the app stores on like Apple and Google Play, even down to any sort of feed that's algorithm based, like YouTube videos, for example. And we've seen an extraordinary variance in the amount of revenue that what we make, and it's more of a personal note for us because we've suffered repercussions as a channel in the past because we've run out of favor with the algorithm. How much of this is Steam's responsibility and YouTube's responsibility, and what can we do about it as small creators to try and negate this reliance on just one company, the whims of the algorithm of one company? Is there much we can do about that?
I think with some of these indie developers, this is going to be an even bigger reason to consider going to the Epic Store again, because if they can get the better cut, which everyone knows about by now, but if they get better exposure as well, and if they feel like Steam have let them down, Steam could start losing more titles.
There's a problem with Epic Game Store as an indie because you have to be like valid.
Yeah, they have to approve.
You don't just let any You have to get approved. You don't just let anybody on there. And there's platforms like Itch.io or something that specifically helps indie developers get more money. And there's also other revenues, like there's crowdfunding and stuff like that. That we get supported by Patreon.
Yeah.
We suffered dips in the algorithm all the time. Last month for us was absolute catastrophic, you could say. And we could do our own graph on this because we're reliant on algorithms in much the same way. It's just the way the world is now, isn't it? It's just we're based on algorithms. You don't walk into a store anymore. You don't walk past in the games section and walk past all the games, get to browse all the games. You only get served the games that the algorithm dictates to you. So if your revenue is something like 90% based on one company's algorithm, then 1 month to the next, you're talking about people's livelihoods here. You could be laying people off. You could not be able to afford to pay the rent or whatever.
Yeah.
Because one person tweaked with a couple of digits in an algorithm in the other side of the world. It's that drastic.
I think the physical store analogy is a really interesting one, because I remember I would go into a game shop and I would browse through all the games that were just sitting on the shelf, and you'd find some stuff that you'd never heard of before. You're like, oh, that's got a cool box or whatever. You flip it over, you read the stuff on the back. Oh, cool, it does this. That sounds fun. But that doesn't happen anymore because everything in front of you is already dictated by the algorithm, which you have no control over. Yeah. And from what I can gather, a lot of the people behind it don't even really understand it.
The problem is, we always talk about the amount of games saturating the Steam store, and this is just another instance of how this is not helping. These independent developers need to make a living, and the more competition that you've got, the less percentage of the market you get, and it's just getting worse and worse. There's no way to be certain. There's no way to know how much revenue you're getting from one day to the next. You see the decline on these graphs. One day you're doing fine, 2 days later you're living out of a fucking cardboard box or whatever, and without a pot to piss in.
Through no fault of your own. It's nothing you've done. It's not like the quality of your work has changed. Now, we're not sitting here trying to bag on Steam. We're just trying to tell you that the reaction of these indie developers, because it seems like a dodgy thing, but again, Steam is a business and they've got their own bottom lines to think about. They have released a statement to Kotaku, who were probing them for a response, which says, "We're monitoring the effects of the changes now that they've been deployed on a larger scale, and we're reviewing the mix of feedback from all sources. It's too early to say what changes will be made, but new features and tweaks are always likely after initial release." So again, it's a standard sort of corporate response, which doesn't have a lot of meat to it or anything.
Yeah, cookie cutter response essentially. Yeah, we're going to assess it as it goes and make tweaks or whatever. Everyone says that these days, but it's just highlighting again how much creators are reliant on algorithms and other people's whims these days to stay operating. And what my advice to people would be, like, any independent developer that you support, by God, support them. Share their posts, share their, if you can, support on Patreon. And this is a call out to all you viewers who do support us as a channel. We're suffering from algorithms every single day, month to month, right? It's very difficult. So head over to Patreon and support us, as well as your other creators, as well as indie games. Make sure you wishlist them games, guys. Make sure you wishlist games that you're interested in if you see them, because these developers who you are fans of are suffering because of people's whims and algorithms getting messed up or whatever. So I know there's nothing more that I can say about that.
That's all I have to say about that.
And wishlisting, it's not like it takes any effort from you. It's just a little click, but it makes a lot of difference to these developers. So why not?
Yeah.
Why not do it? Why not help them out?
And we made sure that we put some gameplay from some of these indie games that we're discussing today. If you are interested in any of these games that you've been watching during this video, links in the description.
But anyway, that is just what we think about all this. As Gaz said, you can support us over at patreon.com/prettygoodgaming. And if you really want to help out the YouTube algorithm, leave a comment down below, leave a like, and so you stay up to date on whatever we post next. Hit that subscribe button and the bell. But in the meantime, I've been Henry, he's been Gaz. We'll catch you next time. Bye for now.